book of Luke, chapter 7, verses 11 through 17. Soon afterward, Jesus went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a large crowd went along with him. As he approached the town gate, a dead person was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. And a large crowd from the town was with her. When the Lord saw her, his heart went out to her, and he said, "Don't cry." Then he went up and touched the bier they were carrying him on, and the bearer stood still. He said, "Young man, I say to you, get up." The dead man sat up, and he began to talk, and Jesus gave him back to his mother. They were filled with awe and praised God. "A great prophet has appeared among us," they said. "God has come to help his people." This news about Jesus spread throughout Judea and the surrounding country. The word of the Lord.
I don't know about you guys, I just love watching the little kids up here because they are so unpredictable. And then I love watching the moms go crazy. It's never the fathers. That's always the moms get sent up here. And I very much enjoyed the hand movements, watching you, the congregation. I couldn't see what was going on down here, but I watched Bobby and Sherry, and boy, they had it nailed down to the rafters, which was great. So, I don't know how many have been watching National Geographic lately. They had a program on last night on King Tut. Tutankhamun, and they made some discoveries about Tutankhamun. One is that he was buried with a large collection of shoes. That's really for real, and they looked like sandals, and they had a little piece going across the top because he had some foot problems. But they also, I understand, may have heard as King Tut sat up when they were in the tomb, he said 4 words, and they were just astonished. He said, "I want my mummy." That's 3 bad jokes this morning, and I think that's enough. Right. So today I am going to be talking about that it isn't easy being a mother, an ancient tale. Some years ago, by the way, there'll be 3 stories about 4 people, one very brief one a little longer, and then the rest. Some years ago, a woman had been born into a large family in New York. There were close to about 6 or 7 kids, and this woman grew up trying to figure out how her mom was able to so patiently and so easily handle all of these children. She was a single mother, it doesn't say why, but she just knew she had great patience and great love, and so she sent in a really cute story to Reader's Digest, and I thought I'd share just a little bit of it with you this morning. She said, "My mom had a great sense of humor and a knack for making everything fun. One thing that resonated with me, though," she said, "even as a small child, was how much she seemed to enjoy her own company and found ways to entertain herself. As a kid, I remember her giggling while she was paying her bills. What was so funny about bill paying, I thought? Well, she would put humorous notes in the reference section of each check. So for the electric company, she might put, "You light up my life." For the phone company, she might put in the reference section, "Reach out and touch someone." And then finally, for her mortgage, she'd write 4 shingles to owning it all. So there are different ways for people to handle coping with being a parent, with helping to raise children. There's one woman in particular, though, that I was struck by earlier this week that I read about. Her name is Rabia Saeed, and she is from Nigeria. Her father was a soldier. She attended an army school, finishing the top of her class. She says, "If you are very intelligent in my country, the government directs you to do science." She said, "I've always wanted to study higher education. I never wanted to just stay back and be a wife and mother. But after high school, she put her dreams on hold because she had 3 children. And so she had to wait until she could balance motherhood with her studies. 10 years passed, and within all that time, her classmates had graduated, and she was wishing that she had been with them in all of that. But when she finally went back to school, with the 3 kids, she excelled in the sciences with her top grades in physics and received her doctoral degree. Voigt now serves as Deputy Dean of Student Affairs as a professor at a university in Nigeria. And she lectures undergraduate and postgraduate students in the Department of Physics. Her research has covered electronics, particle physics, atmospheric physics, and space weather physics. She applies it to local environmental needs, including hydropower and waste recycling. She has been published in journals for applied physics and also won several awards, including one significant international award. Rabia Saeed, during that course of time, became a mother of 6 children. And with 6 children and a father who was rarely there, she was able to balance her studies in applied physics, becoming that professor, becoming an honored professor, and balancing that with 6 children. I don't know how people do that kind of thing, and I've often said, I don't know how mothers do what they do and still remain sane. So today we go back thousands of years to peek in on 2 particular mothers. One is Sarah. Sarah, or Sarai before the Lord blesses her with a child. Sarah is the wife, of course, of Abraham, and Hagar is their handmaid or servant. I found a little prayer poem to start this out today, and it says, Sarah laughed to hear the promise that God would bless her with a son. Sarah laughed, and Sarah doubted till she saw what God had done. God, we praise you for the women who have taught us to be strong, who have held us, who have raised us with a prayer and with a song. Today, as we look at Hagar, we have to ask, who in the world is this person? Now, Hagar, in the Arabic root word, means flight, F-L-I-G-H-T. It could also mean immigrant, it could mean fugitive, which Hagar had become. Hagar, according to legend, now unfortunately we know very little, if even anything, about Hagar's genealogy. What we do know comes from the Midrash of Jewish literature, Midrash meaning literature of sorts, tales, things like that. And so in the Midrash there is a legend that says that Hagar was the daughter of the Pharaoh, and of course when Abraham and Sarah were in Egypt, the daughter of Pharaoh, this daughter of Pharaoh goes to him and says, I would rather go back and live with Sarah. And the king says, what? You would leave this land, all that you have? And according to the Midrash, she says, better to be a handmaiden in the tents of Abraham than a princess in this palace. Now, that is definitely fictitious. That is definitely the kind of thing that a Jewish Midrash would use as a piece of evangelism, I suppose, but no more true or correct than having an ice layer or snow all over the deserts of Arabia. If Hagar was a slave girl, then her mistress, of course, was legally entitled to do as she pleased with her. Knowing that it was humanly or inhumanly possible for Sarah to have children, she goes to her handmaiden Hagar Hagar and says, I want you to have a child with my husband. Abraham goes, no, I can't do that. And Sarah says, yes, you can. And so Abraham enters into the tent with Hagar, and Hagar conceives and bears him a son. That is consistent with the moral standards of that day. That is consistent with the laws of that day. And the laws happen to come from a huge stone tablet called the Code of Hammurabi. I don't know how many of you have ever heard of the Code of Hammurabi. It was written as far back as perhaps 1754. It's a Sumerian Babylonian piece of work that sits in a museum in Dresden, Germany. It is 7.5 feet high, and it has Egyptian symbols on the top of it, and then carved into this enormous tablet are 283 laws. It's a lot of chipping away to get at 283 laws. At this point, what we learn in a part of that particular code is that if a servant or slave to a mistress bore her husband's children, then that particular mistress could not, in fact, sell the slave. But she could reduce her to the level of being like any other slave in her household. But here's the problem, and here's kind of the theme that ties all of these stories in together a bit. And that is that God's sovereignty is always perfect. So what we get here then is Sarah running way ahead of God in deciding that her plan is better than God's plan. Sarah is going to have Hagar bear a son or a daughter who will be the promised child. Sarah is running way ahead of God, and fortunately today none of us would be that stupid to run ahead of God's plan for our lives. Now, as Sarah gives this Gentile woman from a pagan country to Abraham to bear his promised seed, Sarah has decided that she knows far better than anything God knows. Hagar becomes the helpless victim of Sarah's scheming. Sarah distrusted God when she resorted to such an action. And as a child of faith, did she not know that God was able, according to Scripture, to raise up children out of stones unto Abraham? As for Abraham, in spite of current custom, he should have said, no, Sarah, that is not going to happen. But he protests too loudly, and he says, okay, I'll take care of that. And then he goes in to Hagar. They have a son. The attempt to secure the child of promise by Hagar was a result of a lack of faith in Sarah. It was a lack of faith in God's sovereignty. It's a lack of faith, frankly, in God. And what sorrow, anguish, and loneliness Hagar suffered having to comply with Sarah's wishes to run God's promise of an heir for Abraham. There are 16 verses in chapter 16 of the book of Genesis. And in those 16 verses are a number of themes that can be pulled out of them. One of them I think we have to look at is a theme that is obviously the foolishness of Sarah. We've already seen that Sarah's folly had its root in unbelief. She was impatient. She wanted the promised child without delay. Her unbelief became contagious. For Abraham, the Scripture says, hearkened unto her voice. Sarah was supposed to be a godly woman, according to Hebrews 11, verse 11. But what she did is she set into motion a plan that would have consequences for all the ages to come. what she did in having Hagar bear a son, Ishmael, she started an ancient rivalry which lasts to this day. Because, as you probably know, Ishmael is considered to be the father of the Ishmaelites. He is supposed to be the father of the Arabic world, thus the father ultimately of Muhammad, who is the founder of Islam. This particular plan has set into motion an animosity between the Jews, the Palestinians, the people of the Middle East, and the Jews, that have created over centuries an ocean of blood in their viciousness and their anger that has not been quelled even to this day. You know, the problem is that a lot of times with anger and agitation, people get stuck in a place that I like to call the weeds of unbelief. The weeds of unbelief, where the weeds of contention over things large and small begin to blow out of proportion. They make for a very nasty place to get stuck, this field of weeds. And Sarah created a field of weeds back in the ancient days that lasts even unto today and well beyond our lifetime. The next thing we could look at is the flight of Hagar. Hagar literally meaning flight. Strife quickly follows the human arrangement which Sarah had made. Having conceived by Abraham, Hagar, according to the Bible, begins to chide her mistress. And the jealousy gets off to a roaring start between these two mothers. Eventually, in time, supposedly, Ishmael begins to tease and vex Isaac, who becomes the child of Sarah. There is discord that arises between Abraham and Sarah. And although Sarah was the maker of this discord, there will be enmity between supposedly Isaac and Ishmael. And Sarah finally says, I have had enough. I want you, Abraham, notice she doesn't do it herself, I want you, Abraham, to send Hagar and Ishmael out of here. They're gone. And so Abraham does the only thing he can do, and he sends his slave girl Hagar and his son Ishmael out in the desert with about enough water for one day. Better a flight than a fight. Far from home and on her way to a place called Shur, S-H-U-R, Hagar, as she is beginning to perish in the desert, sees an angelic messenger from God. An angelic messenger who appears to her with words from God, and they must have been an incredible relief to a poor, pregnant fugitive. You see, as Hagar traveled further from her jealous mistress, the Lord was on her heels. Hagar, according to law, is not supposed to do this. She is not supposed to leave the tents of her home. Hagar, as a slave, is not supposed to leave without permission. But she does so anyway, and so Hagar believes that she is about to die. But out in that barren desert, something happens that is incredibly amazing. Hagar is one of the only women in the Old Testament, one of the only women in Hebrew Scriptures who has met God or an angel of God and survived to live and tell about it. And she cries out in awe. She says, Lord, you see me. The angel of the Lord says, return to your mistress. That sounds harsh. It sounds cruel. It sounds like there is no plan here except for suffering. But had Hagar remained in the desert, she might have died then. God gave her a promise that although the wrongdoing of her master and mistress had led her into a life of suffering, yet his favor would rest upon her and she would have a son who would become the progenitor of a great multitude, one of the three monotheistic religions in our world today. The soothing promise of God was soothing for the wounded spirit of the poor and the lowly handmaid. Through Ishmael, the name God gave for herself, or for her son, might not be the child of promise. He was not the child of promise, but he was the child of promise for something else, and God had a plan. One of the things that I realized is that life as a mother is not always easy. I don't speak from any authority, because not only am I not a mother, but I don't have any children, but I can speak with the authority of a babysitter whose life was not always easy. As I recall my first night with 3 children that I babysat for 2 or 3 years, my first night was had the incredible experience of 3 children who were determined to place spaghetti all over the walls of the breakfast room and left to go to bed while I was supposed to clean it up. That didn't happen, of course. They stayed up with me and helped to clean it up. But it's not easy being a mother, and it is difficult work to raise a child. And so when Hagar goes back, she spends 14 years with Sarah and Abraham until Sarah gives birth to her son, Isaac, who will be the child of promise. At that point, things get really, really nasty. And frankly, Sarah has had enough. And she says to Abraham, tell these people to get lost. Tell them to get out of here, to go back wherever they came from. Well, of course, they came from Egypt. They came from Egypt in a rather interesting way. Abraham and Sarah, during a famine, go down to Egypt, if you may recall the story. Abraham says to the folks around the area, he says, now Sarah, when you go into this land, you are such a good-looking woman that everybody is going to want you for their wife. And when they want you for their wife, you tell them that you're my sister, because if I say I'm your husband, they're going to kill me and take you anyway. So there are probably at least 1 million people down there in Egypt, and one day the Pharaoh takes a look at these 1 million people, and he happens to see Abraham's wife Sarah, and he says, I like her for my wife. Who is she? Abraham, she's my sister. And so Pharaoh goes and takes Sarah into his household. This is true, it's in the Bible. Pharaoh takes Sarah into the household, and he finds out eventually who Abraham really is, and he says, oh my God, what have you done to me, Abraham? And so instead of killing Abraham, he releases Sarah back to Abraham. He not only releases Sarah back to Abraham, but he gives Abraham lots of goats and cattle and cows and sheep, and he gives him all kinds of servants, including supposedly Hagar, who is a servant slave girl. I love it when Abraham and Sarah do these amazingly bizarre things. So what makes them so important in the Bible? What makes them important is their obedience to God, especially in the case of Abraham. Hagar and Ishmael are now out into the desert with a day's worth of water. And as Ishmael lies dying out in that desert, and Hagar attempts to put Ishmael under a bunch of shrubs to die, God hears the cry of Ishmael, and he hears the cry of the voice of Hagar. And he says, why are you weeping? And she says, I'm weeping because we are dying. We have been forced out of my master's tents. And God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. And both she and her son were saved from death. course, we can't conclude this story without knowing that our last glimpse of Hagar in the Bible is that of a mother looking for a wife for her son. There's a real proclivity for women, especially in the Old Testament, to constantly be looking for wives for their sons. In this story, we see God's compassion over the loneliness, over those who are suffering. We see that God tries to find a purpose for every single person, no matter what their station is in life. God works out his gracious purposes by seemingly harsh methods, yet his strength, his comfort, and his encouragement is a thing that allows us to feel his plan whenever we are at our weakest point. It isn't easy being a mother. Both Hagar and Sarah had honorable qualities, and that's part of why the Bible says, honor your father and your mother. You don't have to love them, as I said. You don't even have to like them. And most children at some point in their lives don't like their parents. However, the Bible says you need to honor them. And the word honor in the Hebrew refers to care or caregiving or revering. You need to honor your parents so that your days go well and long in the land. In 1908, Anna Jarvis held a memorial for her mother at St. Andrew's Methodist Church in West Virginia. Mother's Day was first celebrated, if you will, in a church. It is interesting to note, however, that in the same year of 1908, the United States Congress took up a bill to proclaim something called Mother's Day. According to the record, they joked that if they proclaimed a Mother's Day, they'd also have to proclaim a Mother-in-Law's Day. So they didn't do it. Fortunately, in 1914, Woodrow Wilson signed a Mother's Day proclamation. Folks, today, whether you are a mother, father, grandmother, grandfather, an aunt, an uncle, babysitter, or one who teaches children, or anybody who has been a child, it is good to know that every single one of us here today, those of you out there watching on live stream, every single person is a child of God, claimed and named, and God has a plan for each and every one of you. And so we say, all praise and honor to you, Lord God, for as we know, and as I have said so often, when we are farthest from God, God is closest to us. God has a plan for you, whether you are aware of it or not.